want to quickly move my attention to Mr. Rusiripala Tennakon, a retired senior banker as well as Colombo Municipal Councillor representing the UPFA. Mr. Tennakon, interestingly, tomorrow is going to be the maiden budget of Gotabaya Rajapaksa as well as Mahinda Rajapaksa, probably the first time ever that two brothers are involved in formulating policy for the country ever in its history. It's going to be quite an interesting moment for Sri Lanka tomorrow. What are the expectations from Budget 2021?
Well, I think we have to first look at the situation where we are in today, because we are thinking of a prospective budget which is yet to be presented in Parliament. We are unable to make any specific comments about what is going to happen unless other than a big guess, some kind of a guess. So what we can right now do is we can look into the situation of the economy of the country and the general situation that is prevailing, because it is in that context a budget will have to be presented. That we cannot forget, because what we are facing today not only common to Sri Lanka, it is a global situation. The entire globe is pressed with and saddled with this problem of this pandemic thing, and then no one can predict what is going to happen tomorrow. So in such a situation, I don't think we can talk about the expectations of the budget other than to sustain, maintain the good health, look after the living standards of the people to the best that the government can, and also have good solid plans for a long term and medium term plans as expected in a budget to present as a policy statement. Now, with regard to the presentation of a budget belatedly, as Dr. said, I think we are making a small mistake, because there was no opportunity for the government to present a budget before. We faced the presidential election, immediately followed by another parliamentary election, and then we were faced with the COVID situation. Now this is the period during which a budget is presented to Parliament. November 5th is the normal day during all the previous years, but we have now come very close to that date and we are presenting a budget. So, but anyway, we saw the present president making a policy statement in the Parliament. So if we are, as he says, if we are much more worried about the policy statement and what we are going to do or what we are going to offer to the people, well, that policy statement did cover to some extent what the government had as plans. Now, I wish to state very clearly that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, as the president, in his speech, he had a very sound plan in keeping with this manifesto, which nobody could challenge as a good presentation. He wanted to maintain a growth rate of 6.5%. He wanted to maintain the unemployment at 4%. He wanted to keep the inflation down to pressed at 5%. And he also wanted to maintain a budget, build up a budget deficit to bring it down to 5% of the GDP.
Right.
Now, these are all very good expectations in general terms, which he has presented already. But now we are confronted with how they are going to balance the budget that they are going to present.
I want to ask you, Mr. Tennakon, whether Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been successful in the last 1 year of his presidency to bring Sri Lanka to somewhat economic governance. However, I'll leave that question on a side note for the moment and open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right is senior journalist Asok Dais. Also joining us tonight on the show is Zeenat Muzaffar. On to my immediate left, and also on to my far left is Jayamal Ratnayaka joining us this evening on the show. Let's start off tonight's show with the lady on the journalist panel. So let's start off with Zeenat and then momentarily move to the others.
Thank you, Shamil. This to Mr. Tennakon. Mr. Tennakoon, so because of the tax cuts and restrictions on imports, state revenue has declined. So recently, few factions of the government said that tomorrow's budget will not be a burden to the public. But then, if it isn't for increasing taxes, what other ways does the government have to increase revenue?
Actually, the problem that we are facing today is partly because of the sort of ad hoc measure that was taken in reducing taxes. That's my personal opinion. Our tax revenue has gone down by 274 billion in from 2019. Now, if we are to make ends meet, we have to either increase taxes or adopt some very stringent measures with regard to the facilitations given by the government. Now, these are the two ends within which the government will have to take decisions this time. They have to follow. Now, already there is an import restriction. That is only one way, but that is not significantly contributing to the needs to meet the ends meet, make the ends meet. But then it is some measure, but with that there is some kind of restriction that is imposed. So we have to expect at a time like this, not benefits coming one after the other, or some rights given, or some concession granted to people, but then we have to face a situation in the reality that if the taxes are not going to be increased to make the budget sufficiently revenue based, if we can't do that, the only other way is to curtail the expenditure. So government will have to take very specific measures in this budget.
But Mr. Tennakoon, a lot of people are of the view that bringing in those import restrictions, like on vehicles that are being imported right now presently to the country, is not the way to go about to strengthen the Sri Lankan rupee. Do you agree or disagree?
Oh, you see, there are the pros and cons about this decision, but this is in the present situation. What is any step taken should have an immediate impact. Now, we were facing a situation where the foreign exchange situation was becoming very bad. Our remittances were affected, but now they are picking up. But at that time, we had to take some string to safeguard the situation, at least to maintain that level. So therefore, that import control thing was necessary. But in the long run, import controls are not advocated as good policy decisions.
Absolutely.
In the modern world. That I agree. That is not the best way. But anyway, we were facing a situation, very urgent, immediate situation warranting immediate action. So that was one of the steps that was taken.
Bring your attention to another area now. The Gotabaya Rajapaksa government appointed various ministers independently charged in very specific areas, say elephant conservation to, that sort of, they were very specific, and they were taken, some people say, cut and paste from the Saubhagya Dakma policy document, which in one way is good. You can find a person who is responsible for a particular task. They were appointed, given the letters, but still they didn't get enough money to perform. Do you think that they will get fair amount of funds to deliver from this budget?
Yes, there's a bit of a hilarious nature of this whole thing, how the people look at it, because it was a novel experience, or sort of a novel thing for the ministerial posts to be subdivided into function wise to this level. But then there was some meaning to it. I fully agree that it sort of boiled down to a situation where you entrust some specific responsibility to some people. Otherwise, you have a set of parliamentarians who generally don't stand for any responsibility. They simply come and talk and go. It's like a talk shop. So, I mean, it is better to get them to be tied to some specific task oriented, at least a center, which is good enough. But only thing is, we were faced up with a situation where the government could not provide funds to, make them go with their targets or whatever ideas that they had, or targets that were given to them because of the situation that we faced with. And secondly, the whole, it was they could not apply themselves in those positions. I don't think that they had the opportunity of doing that. But in a way, it is good to sort of divide the functions and then boil it down to this level if they can contribute in some way.
But if there's no funds, no function.
No, that is true. I agree with you. The funds have to be provided, but where does the funds come from? We are facing a situation where from the beginning, from day one, it was a question of sustaining and maintaining the people, the lives of the people, and that is also done not adequate in not sufficiently in keeping with the recommendations even of the WHO or the UNICEF or the World Organizations. Now, according to UNICEF recommendation, Asuka, if you are to meaningfully support the poor in the poverty line in this COVID situation, they had recommended at least the government will have to spend 1.5% of the GDP towards that. But we are far short of that. How many billions have we given? We have to spend at least 30 to 40 billion rupees to maintain and to keep their standards going.
We have a bank also who's seated here, that's Ms. Dennakon, with regard to collateral. But before that, I just want to touch a little bit upon the President's one-year term in office as well, when we're reflecting about the next year. I recollect when the President was making a speech after giving the first set of cabinet appointments, he said very clearly that it's very important for the ministers to perform in the first 6 months of the year, and if they do not perform, they will be sent home. Are you satisfied in the way in which the ministers have performed in the last 6 months?
Shamit, you are absolutely correct. The situation when the President made his policy statement became, suddenly it went out of control with this COVID setup. So nobody could keep to their targets or work according to a schedule because of that situation. So therefore, it is too early for us to comment whether they have failed or whether they have not done anything. Maybe they have in store various plans which they are unable to implement in this situation. But what is important is the President had given them a proper guidelines how to proceed, in what direction. But then unfortunately it could not go.
But the government even failed to prioritize that's what should be in the agenda, Mr.
Yes.
Dennakon. You know this very well. Example, the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. Is that a priority when we are battling COVID-19? Is it?
And then government went on to give approximately 100,000 new jobs in the state sector.
Absolutely. So are these the priorities for the government in place? So when we look at the next budget, what's going to happen?
No, in fact, those are the grey areas that we have. He promised 100,000 jobs to the families of the Samurdhi people. Then 40,000 graduates to be employed. Now all this, where does the money come from? To implement this, it's a very big task. It's really a very difficult task to perform. But he had the plans to do it. It could have happened.
Everyone has plans, Mr. Dennakon. Now that's what Dr. Dhanu Singh all said. Everyone knows what the mistake is. Everyone knows where the nail has to be hit. And everyone knows there's an issue. But implementation is a problem.
No, but no one knew that we will be faced up with a situation like this. Not only Sri Lanka, the whole world. The biggest economy in the world, America, is worst affected. There is a downgrading of their growth rates, And
But
there
Mr. Raghuvan,
are a lot of difficulties.
Can I interrupt you
there.
for a second here? See, when the first wave of COVID-19 struck, if you may recollect right, the president went on national television and said about bringing down dal and canned fish and imposing maximum price control, and then he also said that give us a 2/3 majority at the next election and henceforth we will be able to look after you. Now, a president who knows what he's talking about, and now you are saying that he didn't know that COVID-19 struck, but he very well knew that he was making a plea from the people on that first public statement that he made as a president when COVID-19 struck. Unfortunate, isn't it?
Yes, 2/3 majority was expected.
No, isn't it unfortunate? My question is very simple.
Yeah.
Is it unfortunate?
No, it is unfortunate that it didn't happen in the way that it was anticipated.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it couldn't have happened in that setup. It can't. It's not a situation that we are only facing. It is a situation that the whole world is facing. So therefore, in that context, we have to excuse them for some time until this situation. I am not
So
talking
you
about
you are saying that the president making a statement in one of the rural villages in Sri Lanka saying my word is a circular and henceforth you have to implement it is also okay.
Well, those are there are certain limitations to comments on those, because those are some personal factors coming in.
You are very careful, Mr. Ndukon, today. I don't know why.
They make all kinds of statements.
Usually when you are on Face the Nation, you are very vocal about what's happening around you. And with respective governments being in power, you didn't mind. But today you are taking a very cautious approach.
No,
you seem to be knowing something is going wrong. Henceforth, I won't make that statement. I will back out.
Not because of that.
I feel that's running in your jitters down your spine with regard to some fear psychosis.
No, I feel I fully agree with you that we cannot state what we really feel because of the situation. If we can't attribute a responsibility to a person in a situation which is totally out of control. This is the only thing that prevents us. Otherwise, there are so many things that we can comment on. So many things bad that we can talk about. So many things that have been drifted from the original plans. So many things that they should not have done. So many assignments that they should not have given. So many things that they should have taken care of. The second onset of the COVID in Sri Lanka, this president was commended by the UNICEF as one of the most wonderful leaders who had done the best to keep the first COVID attack under control. What happened? The second one came and no one knew. We were taken unawares. You see, this is the most unfortunate thing.
So, Mr. Ndukon, interestingly, let's talk about the policy framework of Gotabaya Rajapaksa under the topic Vistas of Prosperity and Splendor, focusing on people-centric development, economic development and welfare of the people. However, now the focus should be on public health and COVID-19. 2021 budget, how do you think the allocation should be for the health sector as well as education and other sectors like the military and so on and so forth? What should be the mix?
Sabir, in forecasting the budgetary provisions for health or any other thing, you must exactly look into the prevailing situation. Now, this COVID situation is not something inherent in the health system. This is a pandemic that has come up and that has to end one day. You see, you don't provide for a continuing, ever-ending pandemic situation in the world. We have had pandemics before.
No, we've had only two pandemics.
We have had so many very serious pandemics in the 1950s, 1918
and 1967.
Yeah. No, 1915 also we had that Spanish.
Spanish, so 1918.
Yeah, 1918.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are worst pandemics. So, they don't
At that time, you can't compare
No,
that.
they don't
You can't
stay
compare that to
forever.
2020, Mr.
No,
Ndukon.
they
That's
don't
not
stay
fair.
forever.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how this budgeting has been done and how they did the estimation. But from my point of view, what I see is, what you have to concentrate is the preventive action. Now, there is hardly any curative action in this, no? Tell me what is the curative action now that is done for COVID now? Absolutely nothing. Not even a Panadol will answer. I mean, nothing is given. In the hospital, when you are there, you are given some vitamin C tablets and some antihistamine.
I am not.
I am aware. I have asked the doctors.
However, for disclosure, there are no doctors in the panel. So for disclosure, Mr. Tennakoon, I have to tell the viewers that there are no doctors in the panel today.
No, not necessary. Not necessary. We are
not eligible to make that remark.
The doctors. I have consulted the doctors. I am talking with authority. They say that the treatment that is going on, the worst affected will be given ventilation and treatment, some care in the special care units.
Yes.
What are those
ICU,
units?
ICU.
ICU units. That is all. That is giving oxygen to breathe. Other than that, there is hardly any. The only medication they are giving is some antihistamine tablets.
Rusiripal, now we have to understand the fact that, I mean, in this point, we have to isolate the patient. I mean, that itself is a costly affair.
Those are all preventive.
That's a fact.
Those are preventive actions. For the preventive part, the government would have had an estimation what is actually required. So the provision in the budget, thinking that this is a continuing thing, as if this is going to last forever, I don't think is a realistic estimation.
I'm trying to figure out, Mr. Tennakoon, you being a senior banker, we learn in accountancy one basic principle. Being a CEO, also we learn this. That principle is to consider it as a going concern in the accounting terminology, to make sure that every year the accounts will revolve and have a basic premise for it to be considered as a going concern, and henceforth accountants have to always take into account when they are making a budget to be aware that it has to be taken into a going concern. So budget 2021 should also be on that same premise, isn't it? On that going concern premise, because we don't know what's going to happen next. However, allocations have to be made. Are you saying that allocations should not be made for next year as far as COVID-19 is concerned?
I'm not even endorsing the fact that the allocation that has been made is sufficient. I'm not doing that. But I just cannot comment on that grounds, because my point of view is this is the thing that you have to make an assessment in the reality. You don't have
what
a
is
treatment.
the reality? Okay,
you don't have a treatment.
I'm going to go uninterrupted 30 seconds. Tell me what is the reality.
You have to concentrate on the preventive part. Where we have gone wrong is the prevention part. The second wave, first attack came from where? I mean, that is where the mistake is. The doing the PCR testing is for the people to find out whether you have the illness. But who brought the illness? You have to stop the spreading.
Tell us, who brought the illness?
I mean, it is known that some factory somewhere had done some blunder which has led to this situation.
So, Mr. Tennakoon, is it negligence on part of the authorities or the people?
It is negligence on the part of the authorities. If the airport was following a certain rule of some application of some rule, it should have been commonly applied to everybody. If there was a relaxation or a lapse, it is a responsibility of the authorities who are entrusted with that job. Whoever it is. You can have the highest army man in the airport as the top, or the highest army man in the port as the top. But that doesn't help. If they are lacking in their duty and the job, they are lacking. That we have to say. Here is a lapse, strong lapse, and that is where the thing started. All these PCR testing, these are all secondary things. PCR test is to find out whether you are infected. The main idea is not to make you infect or get into the infection. Prevent you from that. We have failed there. All the other things are secondary and subsequent.
So
this is my view.
So the government has failed.
No, I don't know whether it's the government or somebody down the line.
You said the system has failed. So does that mean the government
somebody is entrusted with a duty to perform, and if that person has failed, it is the failure.
It's a failure of the government.
Yeah, it's the failure of the government. finally it boils down to that, no?
So,
Not
talking
that,
about
not that the man at the top of the government is responsible personally, but he has to take the responsibility. Samir, with your permission, can I interrupt?
Of course, of course.
Ibrani's
Yeah.
contribution about this medical thing. I must say that I mean we'll be failing in our sort of contributions if we don't mention this. You know the port city project that is in the offing. There is specific provision for medical and education in that project, and that will be a center of attraction for the entire region for medical development. I was doing a paper, that's why I'm fully aware of this. I was doing a paper, the second agreement that was done by the former government to changing the first agreement with the Chinese investors. I mean, that has included so many things in that. The original agreement also was included medical facilitations and medical medical tourism and that type of thing, you know, associated with the medical part. So we can be hopeful that when with the coming of the port city project 2023, I think it will be in action, that part where we are allocated land, we are given permission to go into specifically to education and medical. So that will be hopefully, if that materializes, and already the presidential task force that is in operation has set up a unit. I don't know what they have done. I only know that they have set up a unit and they have allocated the functions to them. This is one of the areas that have been allocated. There are so many committees that have come up in the
presidential task force on what? There are a lot of presidential task forces.
No, there's one unit, the presidential task force unit, which covers so many areas. This is one area where it is covered by the directly under the president. High time they take over these debts that have been passed on to the SOEs. Now, commercial banks during the first 9 months in this country, this last 9 months, the lending figures are like this: 800 billion to the government, 200 billion to the SOEs, 200 billion to the private sector. Now, this SOE lending they are not guarantees, they are on letters of comfort, what is called. They issue a letter, they are called letters of comfort. There is hardly any legality in those. I don't know who issues and who signs those. Somebody in the treasury issues a letter to the state banks. That is the case that I know. They have been lending at this rate to Sri Lankan Airlines. What happens if the Sri Lankan Airlines debt is actually considered as real debt, which they should, because they have already defaulted and that's a loss-making company? According to central bank standards, that money should have been transferred to non-performing loans in the People's Bank. If that happens, the People's Bank will be bankrupt.
And this is a very serious worry I have also.
There are so many things like this.
Mr. Tenneco, now the State Minister of Finance has said, that's Ajit Nivard Cabral, who was the former governor of the central bank of the country as well, has said that we do not want to go to the IMF. There is no reason for us to go to the IMF. However, Daniel is of the view that we have to go to the IMF. What is your view?
I think it is, he's compelled not to go there because IMF will not give money as you ask, the way you ask. They will have their conditionalities, they will have their assessments, they will have their monitoring programs, and we will have to stick to those. When you borrow from a state bank, there's nothing like that. You borrow, issue a letter saying that we will, if in the event we default, that party default, we will pay it. That's all. But with the IMF, you can't do that. So therefore, even if he wishes to go to IMF, because the last tranche IMF gave, you see, I think that is virtually the restructuring, final structuring arrangement that was given. No?
Mr. Singh, now we're talking about a bailout. We're talking about a bailout from the IMF or the World Bank or the ADB, which would be bilateral loans against commercial debt, Dr. Dhinusingha. However, what really requires a bailout right now is Sri Lankan Airlines, which is a government enterprise, which is going at a loss. And right now, if you look at the forecast for the tourism sector in the longer run, apart from the fact that Mr. Tennakoon might say that it's not the case, COVID-19 will end, next year is going to be a tough year for Sri Lankan Airlines.
No international lending agency will give to a place like Air Lanka loan to keep that as
So
going as it is. As it is.
Let's listen
They
to
will
what
say,
Dr. Dunusingha
they will
has
say,
said.
go to hell, you go and sell that
So
or do
who's going to
something.
bail out? Who's Mr. Risibala Tennakoon, retired senior banker as well as council member of the Colombo Municipal Council representing the UPFA.
Yes, I think what we are facing is a badly managed economy inherited by a government, a short-lived government during a very difficult time. Now from 2000 to 2013, the growth rate that was recorded in this country was 8%. And between 2015 and 2019, when that regime ended, it had come down to 2.3%. There was no COVID, there was no other visible dangers or things that the government confronted with, other than their own misunderstandings and the difficulties, the differences they had among themselves. There was nothing other than that. The world situation was not that bad. There was not a contributory damaging factor to affect the development. If they want to really put that on rail, that could have happened, but they failed to do that. So the economy that was inherited by the present government was an economy that has fallen to that level. Now the debt, as rightly stated by my friend here, Dr. Dunusingha, that the debt servicing situation is the worst that we have to face. We need, at least for debt servicing, 6.7 billion a year. Now our reserves are, minus the gold content, our reserves are less than that amount. And in the coming 4 years, we need 4.5 billion a year to service the debt. So this is the situation where we are in. So in such a situation, we have, and the world, as he rightly said, we can't look up to the rest of the other parts of the world because their importing capacities are limited. They are equally affected like us. So we can't improve our exports to the extent that we plan. Therefore, we have to look inwards to the domestic side, and mainly agriculture plays a very important role in that. Not only agriculture, the service part, the pending developmental activities that we have already initiated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Risibala Tennakoon, retired senior banker. Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer of Economics, University of Colombo, Indrani Fernando, Chairperson of Women's Chamber of Industry and Commerce, as well as Daniel Alphonsus, a former advisor to the Minister of Finance. Thank you very much, Asoka, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. It was a pleasure to have you on board. Also joining us tonight was Zeenath Muzaffar, as well as Jayamal Ratnayaka. Nice to have the two of you, also the two young guns on the show tonight as well. Tomorrow is D-Day for the government. The maiden budget of the Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Mahinda Rajapaksa regime will come into play tomorrow. Will the government be able to pull a rabbit from the hat using the magic wand? Only time will tell. A few hours from now, we would know what the content of the budget is. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. We don't have $1 trillion debt because we haven't taxed enough. We have $1 trillion debt because we spend too much. Take care and good night.